The day my mother told me I wasn't welcome at my own sister's wedding, I laughed at first thinking it was one of her cruel little jokes. But when her lips pressed into that thin line I'd known since childhood, when her eyes hardened into two shards of winter glass, I understood she wasn't joking at all. She meant it. She was forbidding me, her own daughter, from standing beside my sister on the most important day of her life. And for a moment, I thought my heart had slipped right out of my chest and shattered on the kitchen tiles. I should start from the beginning so you understand who I am. My name is Caroline. I'm 52 years old now, a woman who has lived more than half her life under shadows, carrying a wound that never fully closed. I was born the eldest of two daughters in a small New England town in a family that was both admired and feared. My father had money, not the kind you brag about in magazines, but the kind that carved out power in quiet ways, real estate land, and the ability to control what people whispered about us behind lace curtains. My mother was the gatekeeper of that power. She was beautiful in the cold, sculpted way of a statue, all sharp cheekbones and perfect posture, with a tongue that could cut anyone down to size in under a minute. Growing up, I thought she was a goddess. I thought her disapproval was something I could cure by being better, by being perfect. I studied harder, cleaned the house, until my hands bled, dressed in clothes she approved of, and even learned how to walk and smile exactly the way she did. But perfection wasn't the goal. Control was. And I was never her chosen one. That was my sister Amelia. Amelia was born when I was 6, a late surprise, and from the moment she arrived, I became the background character in my own family. Amelia had curls like spun honey cheeks that flushed pink at the smallest touch, and a laugh that made strangers stop and smile. My mother adored her. My father spoiled her, and I became the shadow. I learned quickly that if Amelia wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I was told to be patient, to wait to give it up for her sake. She's younger, my mother would say, as though that explained everything. But it wasn't just favoritism, it was something deeper. Something I didn't understand until much later. My mother didn't just prefer Amelia. She needed her like a queen needs her heir. And I was the practice child, the one who absorbed the discipline so Amelia could shine unblemished. By the time I was in my 20s, I'd already learned that my opinions didn't matter in that house. When I brought home a boyfriend, I loved a man named Michael, who was kind and steady. My mother dismissed him as too common. Amelia, only 16 at the time, smirked behind her glass of wine, as if she knew her words mattered more than mine. When Michael eventually left me, he told me he couldn't handle how my family treated me, how I allowed them to treat me. His leaving broke something in me, something I never managed to fix. So, when Amelia got engaged 30 years later, it should not have surprised me that I wasn't invited to her wedding. But it did. Because deep down, some part of me had never stopped hoping that one day, my mother would look at me and see more than a mistake. That morning, she stood in her immaculate kitchen, the granite countertops gleaming like mirrors, and said, "Caroline, it's best you don't come. This day is about Amelia, and I won't have you stirring trouble." I remember the sound of the clock ticking behind her, loud enough to drown out the ringing in my ears. "Trouble," I whispered. I just wanted to be there. She's my sister. Her face didn't move. "You've always made things about you. This is not your day. Don't embarrass us." And just like that, the decision was final. I cried for days. Not the kind of tears you shed in passing, but the kind that leave your body empty, like you've bled out through your eyes. I thought about Amelia in her dress, walking down the aisle with my mother glowing beside her, and I thought about the empty chair that should have been mine. But what my mother didn't know, what no one knew, was that fate had other plans. On the day of the wedding, I told myself I wouldn't go. I told myself I would respect their decision no matter how much it tore at me. But as the hour approached, my chest grew tighter, my breath shallow, until I realized I couldn't sit in my apartment, knowing that my sister, my only sister, was about to be bound for life while I was exiled. So I went. I didn't walk in with an invitation. I didn't even dress for the occasion. I wore a simple navy dress, plain shoes, and I pulled my graying hair into a bun. I thought maybe I would just stand in the back, watch her from afar, and leave without anyone noticing. But life doesn't let secrets stay hidden forever. The church was glowing with candles, every pew filled with people in silk and pearls. Amelia looked like an angel at the altar, her veil trailing like smoke, her smile radiant. My mother sat in the front row, her spine stiff, her expression a mask of pride. For a moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake, because just seeing them made me ache with a longing I couldn't bear. And then it happened. The priest asked if anyone objected. Silence filled the church like a held breath. And then, from the back, a voice spoke, not mine, but an old man's voice, trembling yet firm. I object. The room erupted. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. The man stepped forward. He was frail, with white hair and shaking hands, but his eyes burned with a truth no one could ignore. I object, he said again, louder this time. Because this family hides lies that poison every union they bless, and I can no longer carry it alone. I froze. I didn't know him. At least I thought I didn't. But when his gaze swept the crowd and landed on me, my blood turned cold. He knew me. The next few minutes unfolded in chaos. My mother stood up furious, trying to silence him, but the man raised a shaking finger toward her. You know what you did, Margaret. You know the truth about Caroline. The church gasped. My sister's smile faltered, and I felt the earth open beneath me, because in that moment, I knew. The secret I had felt all my life, the reason I had been treated as less, was about to spill into the open. The old man's voice cracked as he spoke. Caroline is not just your daughter. She is the daughter of your husband and me. You raised her as your own, Margaret, but she is mine as much as his. And you hated her for it every day of her life. The air was sucked out of the room. My knees buckled. My vision blurred. My sister clutched her bouquet as if it could anchor her to the floor. And my mother's face twisted with a rage I had never seen before. It was true. It had to be. Somewhere deep inside, I had always known. I had always felt the distance, the disdain, the unspoken wall between us. And now, in front of God, in front of the whole town, the truth had finally clawed its way into the light. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move, because every pair of eyes in that church had turned toward me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I could feel their stares like heat against my skin, burning me, branding me, demanding that I be something ashamed, humiliated, broken. My mother's lips moved, but no sound came out at first, just a thin rasp, like the air had abandoned her. Then she found her voice sharp and slicing through the stunned silence. "Lies!" she hissed, her hands trembling, though she tried to hide it by clutching at her pearls. "This man is deranged. Caroline, don't listen to him. Sit down. Sit down." But the damage was already done. The whispers grew into a roar. Guests leaned toward each other, eyes darting from me to my mother, to the trembling old man who looked like he might collapse at any second. My sister's bouquet slipped from her hands, roses scattering across the marble floor like drops of blood. I felt my chest tighten, breath shallow, like I was drowning without water. My legs finally obeyed me, and I stumbled forward. My voice cracked when it finally escaped. "Is it true?" I asked, not to him, not to anyone else, but to her. To the woman who had raised me, punished me, exiled me. My mother. Her eyes locked on mine, colder than I had ever seen them. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then the faintest twitch betrayed her. Not anger, not disdain, but fear. And in that fraction of a second, I had my answer. The old man swayed, clutching the back of a pew for balance. "I begged her to tell you," he whispered. "All these years I begged, but she couldn't bear to admit her husband betrayed her. So she punished you instead." His voice cracked, broken by years of silence. "Forgive me, Caroline. Forgive me for not being strong enough to claim you. Forgive him." My whole body shook, not with sorrow, but with something sharper. Rage. It wasn't just that I had been lied to. It was that my entire life had been shaped by this buried secret, this poison that my mother had fed me day after day, while my sister was drenched in love and pride. The priest stammered, trying to regain control, but the moment was gone. The ceremony was ruined. Amelia turned toward me, her face, pale eyes darting between us like she was seeing me for the first time. "Caroline," she whispered, but she didn't move to me. She didn't come. She stood there, still rooted beside the altar, torn between the sister she had ignored and the mother who had crowned her golden. And me, I felt something harden inside me. Years of grief and guilt fused into steel. "I spent my entire life trying to earn your love," I said, my voice shaking but rising. I scrubbed floors until my knuckles bled, studied until my eyes burned, gave up everything I ever wanted because I thought I was the problem. Because I thought if I was good enough, you'd finally see me. My throat ached, but I kept going. But I was never the problem. You were. You hated me because every time you looked at me, you saw the truth you couldn't face. The room was silent now, every guest holding their breath. My mother's face contorted with fury, but her silence was my vindication. "I may be his daughter," I said, pointing toward the old man whose tears now streaked his weathered face, "but I was yours too. And you chose to raise me as punishment instead of love. You stole my childhood. You stole my chance to know myself. And now, the whole world knows why." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I felt a strange, liberating fire coursing through me, a fire I had never known before. For the first time in 52 years, I was not the one begging. I was the one standing tall. And then something I never expected happened. My sister stepped forward. Her veil trembled around her face as she moved one step, then another, until she stood between me and my mother. Her voice was soft, almost too soft for the church to hear. "Caroline." I didn't know. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I swear to you, I didn't know." I searched her face, desperate for even a shred of truth. And I saw it, the confusion, the betrayal that mirrored my own. For once, Amelia wasn't the golden child. She was just a daughter caught in the same web of lies. But before I could answer, my mother's voice split the air like lightning. "Enough!" she shrieked. "This is not the time nor the place. You will not ruin this day." Her hand shot out, clutching Amelia's wrist, dragging her back toward the altar like a doll. But Amelia resisted. For the first time in her life, she resisted. "Mother, stop!" Amelia whispered, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. This isn't Caroline's fault. This is yours. The gasp that rippled through the pews was louder than any organ hymn. My mother froze her hand, still gripping Amelia, but her power suddenly crumbling. The guests were no longer whispering, they were staring at her the way they had always stared at me. And for once, it was her turn to feel exposed. The old man sank onto a pew, his body too frail to stand any longer. My sister pulled free from our mother's grasp and moved to me. Slowly, hesitantly, she took my hand. It was a gesture so small, but it nearly brought me to my knees. My mother saw it too. Her lips trembled with fury, her whole body shaking. But she said nothing. She couldn't. Because every lie she had built, every mask she had worn, had cracked in front of the entire world. I didn't stay for the end of the ceremony. There was nothing left to stay for. The wedding was ruined, the guests unsettled, and Amelia's groom stood stiff at the altar, his face a mask of confusion. I walked out of that church with my head held higher than it had ever been. Not because I wasn't hurting, I was. God, I was bleeding inside. But because for the first time, the truth wasn't mine to carry alone. Outside, the air was crisp sharp with autumn, the kind that cut into your lungs but woke you up. I leaned against the stone steps, trying to steady myself. The old man followed slowly, his cane clicking against the stone. I'm sorry, he whispered again, his voice breaking. I should have claimed you. I should have fought harder. I was a coward. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes, though weary, held something I had craved my whole life: recognition. You're my father. I said the word strange and heavy on my tongue. He nodded, tears spilling freely. Yes, and I failed you. I closed my eyes, the fire in me dimming into ash. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream at him. But all I could feel was exhaustion. You weren't the only one who failed me, I whispered. Behind us, the church doors slammed shut. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because the past had already followed me out. The air outside the church clung to me raw and unforgiving, as though it too carried the weight of truths that had long been hidden. My hands shook, but I refused to let anyone see me falter. For once in my life, I wanted the world to remember me not as the quiet daughter, not as the overlooked sister, but as a woman who finally stood her ground. The old man, my father, though the word still felt foreign, lowered himself onto the steps beside me. His cane rattled against the stone as he set it down. He didn't look at me, not at first. Instead, he looked up at the gray sky, his lips moving as though he were rehearsing the apologies he'd never had the courage to give. I used to watch you from a distance, he said finally, voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind. Your first day of school, the Christmas plays, even when you won that little art competition in 5th grade. I was there, always at the edges, always pretending I was just another guest or passerby. I saw you, Caroline. I was proud, but I didn't dare step forward, not with her watching. My mother. Even outside the church, her presence loomed like a shadow cast across my life. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because part of me wanted to scream that watching was not the same as being there, that pride meant nothing without action. But another part of me, an exhausted, fragile part, soaked up his words like dry earth drinking rain. I thought of my childhood nights when I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering why my mother's love never reached me, why my father seemed so distant, so absent, as though he didn't care. And now, here he was, telling me he had cared all along, but in silence. A secret father to a secret daughter. The church doors opened and voices spilled out. Some guests left quickly muttering, clutching their coats, their faces pale with scandal. A few lingered on the steps, their gazes flicking between me and the old man, as though they were watching a story unravel in real time. My shame should have returned then, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a strange steadiness, like the ground beneath me was finally solid. And then Amelia emerged. Her veil was gone, her hair loosened in the autumn wind. The white of her gown seemed too bright against the grayness of the day, like she didn't belong to this world of secrets and betrayals, but had been dragged into it nonetheless. She stopped at the top of the steps, her eyes finding mine instantly. "Caroline," she said softly, almost as though she were afraid to break me. I rose to my feet, wary, uncertain. "Why are you here? Shouldn't you be inside?" Her lips trembled. "The wedding's over. There's no going back after what happened in there." I blinked at her, stunned. "You mean—" She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. He walked out. He said he couldn't marry into a family built on lies. Mother screamed at him, begged him, but it was too late. He left. Her voice cracked then, and for the first time since we were children, she looked small, vulnerable. Not the adored, untouchable sister, but just a woman who had watched her life collapse in a single afternoon. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. She stepped closer, her hands twisting in the fabric of her ruined gown. "Say you don't hate me. Say we can try to be sisters again. Please, Caroline." Her plea struck something deep in me. For years I had envied her, resented her, even despised her for the pedestal she had been given while I was left in the shadows. But looking at her now, her crown shattered, her future in ruins, I realized something I had never dared admit. Amelia had been just as trapped as I was. She had been raised not as a daughter, but as a trophy, polished and paraded, never allowed to stumble, never allowed to see the truth. I wanted to reach for her. I wanted to say yes, to let the bond of blood and shared pain mend the fractures between us. But the wound in me was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. "I don't hate you," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "But I don't know if I can love you either. Not yet. Maybe one day." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. She didn't push. For the first time, she respected my boundaries, and that in itself felt like a gift. My mother appeared at the doors, then her face pale, her hands trembling, though she tried to hold herself tall. The murmurs around us hushed, as if everyone was waiting to see what she would do. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the stone, until she stood just a few feet away. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw no power in them. No control. Only defeat. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her chin trembled, and I realized with a jolt that she was close to breaking.
But I didn't care. Not anymore.
"You built this," I said to her, my voice steady. "You built it with lies and cruelty, and now it's crumbling. You always told me not to embarrass you, but today you embarrassed yourself."
The words fell between us like a final stone sealing a tomb. Her face twisted, but she didn't argue. She couldn't, because the truth was too heavy to deny. I turned away from her, from the church, from all of it. My father struggled to his feet, his cane wobbling as he reached for me. "Caroline," he whispered, his voice pleading. "Let me try. Please, let me be part of your life, even if it's late." I looked at him, at his worn face, his desperate eyes. My chest tightened. All my life, I had dreamed of a father who would claim me, who would love me openly. And now, here he was, too late, but still here. "I don't know if I can," I said, the honesty cutting me as much as it cut him. "But I'll think about it. and that was the most I could give.
I walked down the steps, then my dress heavy against my legs, the wind pulling at my hair. Each step felt like I was shedding something, the fear, the shame, the years of silence. For the first time, I wasn't walking toward them. I was walking away. Behind me, the church loomed no longer holy, but haunted a monument to the lies that had poisoned our family. Ahead of me, the road stretched wide and empty, frightening in its uncertainty, but thrilling too. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if Amelia and I would ever find our way back to each other, or if my father would live long enough for us to build something new. But I knew one thing: I was no longer the shadow, and that was enough. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and silence of phone calls I didn't answer, and letters I left unopened on my kitchen counter. The town fed on scandal like it always had, and for weeks, my name was on every tongue. At the grocery store, I could feel eyes burning into my back, and at the post office, people fell quiet the moment I walked in. They weren't cruel, not exactly. They were curious, pitying, hungry for the taste of a story that wasn't theirs. But behind closed doors, the silence was worse. My apartment was too small to hold so much pain, yet I felt trapped in it. Nights stretched long and sleepless. I sat in my worn armchair, staring at the wall, replaying everything: the way Amelia's bouquet had scattered across the marble floor, the tremor in my mother's hands, the old man's voice cracking as he claimed me too late. It was strange how betrayal didn't just burn once. It echoed again and again like a wound that kept reopening. I told myself I wanted nothing more to do with them. I told myself walking away had been the bravest choice of my life. But the truth is, part of me still longed for answers. Not reconciliation answers. Why had my mother agreed to raise me if she despised me so much? Why had my father hidden in the shadows instead of stepping into the light? And what did it mean for Amelia and me now? Two sisters, bound by blood, but ripped apart by lies. One afternoon, a knock rattled my door. I nearly didn't answer, but the silence had grown too heavy, so I pulled it open. Amelia stood there. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying, her white coat wrinkled like she'd been wearing it for days. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but then stepped aside. She moved through the apartment like she didn't know where to put her hands, eventually perching on the edge of my couch. I stayed standing. "I moved out," she said finally, her voice trembling. Mother wanted me to stay with her after the wedding fell apart, but I couldn't. Not after what I heard. She looked up at me, eyes pleading. "Caroline, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. But I need you to believe me." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, heart aching. "I believe you," I said after a long silence. "But that doesn't erase everything else." Her shoulders slumped, relief and grief mingling on her face. "I don't expect it to. I don't want to lose you too." The words cut deeper than I expected. Lose me too. She had already lost her fiancé, her future, the life she had thought was hers. Now she was afraid of losing her sister, the sister she had barely acknowledged for decades. I wanted to stay guarded, but the child in me, the lonely girl who had once pressed her face against Amelia's bedroom door just to hear her laugh, couldn't resist. "You hurt me," I whispered. "Maybe not on purpose, maybe not with cruelty, but you hurt me. All those years, you let her put me down. All those years you didn't notice. I felt invisible because you chose not to see me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was blind," she admitted. "She raised me to be blind. But I see you now.
and I want to make it right if you'll let me."
I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to push her away to protect myself from the risk of being hurt again. But another part, a part I hadn't let breathe in years, wanted to believe her. "Then start by telling me the truth," I said finally. "Tell me everything you know about her, about Father, about what she's hiding." Amelia nodded slowly. She hasn't said much since that day. She locked herself in her room for nearly a week, but I heard her muttering once late at night when she thought no one was listening. She said she should have sent you away, that keeping you was her greatest mistake. The words hit me like a knife. Even after everything, even after the truth had been exposed, my mother still saw me as a mistake. I sank into the armchair, my body trembling. "Do you know what it's like to spend your whole life begging for scraps of love, only to learn you were never meant to have them at all?" Amelia shook her head, tears falling freely. "No, I don't. But I want to learn. I want to listen." The raw honesty in her voice softened something in me. For the first time, I didn't see Amelia as my rival, my replacement, or even my mother's golden child. I saw her as a woman trying to untangle herself from the same web that had ensnared me. We talked for hours. About the wedding, about our childhoods, about the silence that had always lived in the spaces between us. It wasn't easy. There were moments when anger surged in me, when I wanted to slam the door and end it all. But there were also moments when I remembered the little girl who used to sneak into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching her blanket and whispering that she was scared. When she finally left that evening, she hugged me. It was awkward, tentative, but it was real. And for the first time in decades, I let myself hug her back. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Not from Amelia, not from my mother, but from him, the old man who had stood up in the church and shattered the silence. My father. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were clear. "Caroline, I am dying. My doctor says I don't have long. I need you to come. There are things you deserve to know, things I should have told you years ago. Please don't let me leave this world with the truth still buried." I stared at the letter for hours, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. I had spent 52 years without a father, and now, at the end of his life, he was asking for me. I didn't know if I could face him. I didn't know if I wanted to, but something in his words, "things you deserve to know," pulled at me. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that lies had a way of festering, and I couldn't bear to live with more shadows. The next morning, I packed a small bag, locked my door, and drove to the address he had written at the bottom of the page. A tiny house on the edge of town, paint-peeling windows clouded with dust. He was waiting for me sitting in a worn armchair by the fire, his cane propped beside him. When he saw me, his face broke into a smile so fragile, it nearly shattered me. "You came," he whispered, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of a truth I had never been allowed to hold. I was a daughter wanted, even if too late. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my bag hanging from my shoulder. My breath caught somewhere between fear and forgiveness. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and medicine, a mix that clung heavy to the air. He looked smaller than I remembered from the church, shrunken almost as if confession itself had drained him of years he didn't have left. "Come in, Caroline," he said, his voice rough but warm. "Please, don't leave me talking to an empty doorframe." I stepped inside, each creak of the floorboards sounding like the echo of time lost. My hands were clammy,
and I pressed them against my dress to steady myself. I had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, screaming at him, demanding why he abandoned me, or maybe turning around and leaving before he could speak. But standing there staring into his weary eyes, I felt none of that. I just felt tired. I don't know why I'm here, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You're here, he said, because you still want the truth, and I owe you that much before I go. I lowered myself into the chair opposite him, the fire crackling between us. My heart pounded as though it was trying to escape my chest. Then tell me, all of it, no more lies. He nodded, his hands trembling as they folded in his lap. Your father, Margaret's husband, was a cruel man when he was young. Wealth gave him entitlement, and he used it without care. I worked for him back then, just a laborer on one of his properties. He treated me like nothing. But Margaret, she was lonely. I never meant for it to happen. She came to me in secret, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. You were born from that. I swallowed hard, the firelight flickering across my face. His words filled the hollow spaces inside me, spaces carved out by decades of silence. So she raised me as punishment, I asked, my throat tightening. His eyes filled with tears. She was too proud to let the world know. Too proud to leave her marriage. So she decided to keep you close and remind herself every day of her husband's betrayal and mine. She punished you because you were proof. Proof of her weakness, proof of her pain. He shook his head, his voice breaking. You were never the mistake, Caroline. We were. The tears came then, hot and relentless, streaming down my face before I could stop them. I had waited 52 years to hear those words. That I wasn't the mistake. That my existence wasn't a curse. I wanted to fight for you, he whispered. But I was poor. I had no power. And she threatened to ruin me if I ever told the truth. I thought staying silent would protect you from scandal, from shame. But I see now, it only protected her. I was a coward. And for that, I will always beg your forgiveness. I looked at him, my vision blurred with tears. For so long, I had carried the weight of invisibility, the belief that no one had ever wanted me. But here was this frail man, his voice trembling with regret, his eyes begging for something I wasn't sure I could give. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. Not now, maybe not ever, but I believe you. And that's something. His shoulders sagged, relief softening his face. That's more than I deserve. We sat there in silence for a while, the fire popping and hissing between us. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of peace, not joy, not closure, but the quiet relief of truth finally spoken aloud. When I left his house that night, I knew I would never see him again. He died 3 weeks later. His letter of confession found folded neatly in a drawer addressed to me. I read it over and over, the ink smudged by tears I hadn't meant to shed. He died naming me his daughter, and though I could not erase the decades of absence, I carried his final words like a fragile kind of redemption. As for my mother, Margaret, she never forgave me for exposing her secret, though I had not been the one to speak it. Her pride was too sharp, her bitterness too deep. She tried to salvage her reputation, but the town had already turned its eyes. The whispers she had once controlled now fed on her instead. She grew smaller in those final years, a queen stripped of her throne, and though part of me pitied her, another part finally felt free. Amelia and I, we tried. Slowly, cautiously, like two women learning each other for the first time. There were setbacks, old wounds, reopened sharp words thrown in moments of weakness, but there were also small, steady steps. Coffee shared at quiet tables, phone calls that began awkwardly but ended with laughter. She would never undo the years of being my mother's favorite, but she could choose now to be my sister. And I found, against all odds, that I wanted her to be. Looking back now, I see it all differently. I used to think my life was defined by what was stolen from me: love, recognition, belonging. But I see now it is defined by what I chose in the ashes of betrayal. I chose truth over silence. I chose to stand even when my knees shook, and I chose finally to stop begging for love from those who couldn't give it. The day my mother forbade me from attending my sister's wedding, I thought it was the end. The end of my hope, the end of my place in the family. But that day turned into something else. It became the beginning of my freedom. Because when the entire table turned to look at me, I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the mistake. I was simply Caroline, flawed, scarred, but finally seen. And that is enough. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. These words weren't easy to speak, but they are mine. If my story touched something in you, if you've ever carried silence or felt invisible or wondered if the truth was worth the pain, I hope you know you are not alone. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. And I would love for you to leave a comment. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything?